So if you clicked on this video, it means you want to read more, and you don't just want to read more, you want to remember better what you read. Maybe you're diving into books on neuroscience, physics, or mathematics, or maybe you're thinking back on the Renaissance when some of the greatest writers began to publish their ideas, and you want to read all of these books. But in today's world, with the constant pull of modern technology, and especially the pull of our phone, how do we get to read more, and how do we make the time for reading? So how do we carve out this time? How do we improve retention after finishing a book? And how do we remove all of these distractions and tap into the flow of reading? I believe that training our attention through something as seemingly simple and understimulating as the page of text in a book can be more than just a simple exercise. It's a transformative act. It can shape the rest of our day. It helps you become more mindful about what you consume and gives you the freedom to truly choose what you wish to consume and what you wish to read. Reading is one of those habits that can ripple into every part of our daily life. As scientists, reading can spark new ideas, and a book can take some quiet scientific thoughts and stretch it to the edge of imagination, for example, in science fiction. I truly believe that reading more and reading deeper can expand not only our lives, but also our scientific careers and pursuits. So if you struggle to pick up a book at the end of the day, or if you found it hard to build a consistent habit of reading, this might be the video for you. So let's dive straight into it. So throughout my PhD, I definitely read a lot. I read a lot of neuroscience books that I had to read for my studies, but I also read a lot in my free time, which is more fantasy or science fiction related. And I think this kind of reading habit started as a child when I went on very long holidays that were super boring, so the only thing I could do to escape this boredom was to read. But even to this day, I've kept up the habit of reading as one of the funnest things I do at the end of the day, although it has come in waves, because I definitely noticed in myself with the modern technology pool that it is harder to make time for reading. But in general, I believe that every scientist and every person in general that's curious about life should read. I think it's a truly beautiful habit that can make you calm down a little bit. So in this video, I want to share some of the techniques that I've learned as an academic to not just read more, but also absorb better what you've read and make space for reading in general in your daily life. So let's get straight into it. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about how you read and reading habits of academics. So what I've learned during academia are certain reading techniques that I think I've now also started to apply in my normal reading habits, and they make it such that I think I retain a lot of information better, and I can also retrieve information better that I want to use in my academic work. But first of all, I want to divide the type of reading I do in two types of reading. So first of all, you have this purpose-driven reading, and purpose-driven reading means, for me at least, that you have a certain question that you want answered. So for example, maybe right now you're working on creating a writing routine and you want to know, how can I write better? So you look at books that can answer this specific question. So with this specific question in mind, I think you can skip a lot of irrelevant content if you have a specific question in mind. So how will this book help me to do X? This doesn't mean that every book will solve this specific question, but mostly that books can help you discover or relate to yourself in new ways. So with this type of reading, I think it's really important to skim first and deep read later. So I think it's okay to not read a book in a linear manner if you have this type of question. So for example, you can start by reading a summary of a book and then the conclusions and even discussions, because if you want to have a specific answer for a book, it's not really the experience of reading the book that's most important. So for example, a good example for me that I read in this way is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I personally love this book and I have read it in the end from front to cover. But when I first discovered this book, it was when I was really struggling with writing the last paragraphs for my PhD, and I kind of wanted to build this writing routine, and she gives a lot of very good tips if you're struggling with writing, so highly recommend reading the book. But there are also a lot of exercises in the book and a lot of passages that even if you just skip over the book can be really helpful. So I don't think this is a book that you need to read sequentially. I think you can actually dive into specific parts of the book, and I think that's a really nice reading experience. So the second type of reading that I do a lot is to read with like this inquisitive mindset. So reading with curiosity, where you look for insights, gaps, and potential opportunities. And I think this is really fun to read books outside of the specific question you currently have. So, for example, reading for me in this way is mostly to open up my mind to what is out there. So for me, under this fantasy books fall, science fiction books, but also novels. So to read about experiences that people have had that I will most likely never have in my life. And I think this type of reading actually makes you a more whole human being, because there's this saying that you can live 1,000 lives through reading, something like this. And I think a really good book that I've read lately that for me kind of falls in this category is Doppelganger, A Trip to the Mirror World by Naomi Klein. And Naomi Klein had this experience where she kept being confused for Naomi Wolf. I hope I don't confuse her right now, but anyways. And I found this experience really interesting, and she relates it kind of to how we experience the modern world in the internet age, and also by fake news, and she goes over different topics. But in general, for me, this was a book that described an experience that I don't think I will personally ever have, but it opened up my way of thinking to a lot of different things. And I highlighted a lot of passages in this book because I found it really meaningful, even though I don't think I will ever apply the knowledge directly in my life. So then afterwards, for a lot of people, it's not only that they want to read more or want to read in these different ways, but also that you usually want to remember better what you have read. Which brings me to the second point of academic reading, and that's reading for retention and understanding. And retention and understanding, I think, is only needed for specific books, but I think a lot of people, when they say, I want to read more, they don't only want to read more, they want to learn more and apply what they've read in their daily life. So this is what we will dive in right now. So I, in general, think for understanding of a book or understanding of a concept in general, in my academic career, I kind of learned that it's very important to encounter ideas in multiple formats. So usually when we encounter a new idea in a book, we read the book once and then we put the book away and we forget about this idea for the rest of our life. But what is really nice is if you encounter this idea in a different format a few times. So I would say something like 3 to 7 times to really solidify the idea and also to understand it from different perspectives. So for example, right now I'm reading this book, The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, and I really love this book. It's a great book about love and in general how love relates to masculinity. And she also wrote this other book all about love, and I'm reading that book on audiobooks. So I'm not reading it, I'm actually listening to it. And this combined experience of both hearing one of her novels and reading one of her novels makes it such that I feel like I'm understanding her ideas a lot better. Also, I'm listening to a lot of her interviews right now, and in general, I'm looking at her work from a few different perspectives. So I think this is really important if you want to solidify an idea. The next thing I think is really important to understand an idea better and to also retain it is integration. So in general, in academia, when you read a paper, for example, you want to integrate it in your own scientific work. And I noticed once I integrated an idea from another author or cited another author, that's when I truly start to understand the idea fully, because I'm able to reproduce it in my own words. And the way you can incorporate this in your daily life is to rewrite, for example, some of the ideas that you've read. And this can be as simple as writing a little blog article or a review on Goodreads to as elaborate as trying to integrate it in something you're creating. So this can be a creative work as a YouTube video, or it can be a paper that you're writing for academic pursuits. I think something really nice with this is that oftentimes when you try to incorporate an old idea into your own work is that you will revisit the topic. So a book that did this for me lately was The Center That Cannot Hold by Alan Sachs, and it's from this professor that has first-hand experience in schizophrenia. And I found it really profound because I'm personally doing a lot of research on schizophrenia right now, and I think the way she describes the story or her story is very beautiful and very impactful to me. And it was definitely when I started doing more research on schizophrenia that I remembered her book and revisited her book, and then took some of the passages and quotes that I had highlighted before and incorporated it into my own work. And this really solidified some of the ideas in the book for me. So if I hadn't revisited it and hadn't incorporated it into my own work, I don't think I would have remembered it as profoundly. Another way you can do this type of integration is not only through writing about it, but you, for example, can also discuss about it or collaborate about it. So something that we quite often do when we're writing a paper is that we discuss a lot of the work that we have read with friends. And something easy to do is to start a book club, of course. But if you don't have anyone to start a book club with, there are online book clubs that you can definitely join and discuss with people. And I'm also personally thinking about maybe starting a book club. Let me know if you're interested in something like this, but I would love to like read with all of you, like one book, maybe even just every 2 months or something, and then have a little discussion in the comments. I think that would be so fun, and especially if it's related to neuroscience or psychology. Also, I have created this list of neuroscience books that I hope can be read by everyone, and maybe it will already be in this video, but otherwise definitely on the website or newsletter that I put down below, you can follow and you can see if I have any updates about a book club or this reading list. Yeah, because I would love to read more books with all of you. So lastly, a thing that I also do for reading for better understanding is reading for tracking personal growth and kind of evolving perspective of myself on certain topics. So this is a little bit more vague, but let me try to explain. So what I think about now compared to when I started my PhD has changed a lot. And sometimes what I find really interesting is when I highlight a book, if I revisit this book later and I see what I've highlighted, I can almost tap back into the mind I had at that time. So that's why I think rereading books that you've highlighted is really interesting. And I can remember why it stood out to me at that time, but other times I find it really interesting that certain parts don't resonate with me anymore. And this kind of shows me that I've evolved and I've kind of grown beyond this specific topic, or it just doesn't interest me anymore. So these are kind of these different areas that you have this spacing effect of visiting or revisiting a new book. So in general, as I said, I put sticky notes such that I can see which part of the book I liked. So I think most of my books have these kind of sticky notes, and then I can see what I liked in the book when I was reading it. I then afterwards reread these books usually, and then only the paragraphs I highlighted to kind of remember what I've done. And then I try to reflect on why I put that down and kind of see if that is still relevant or if it has changed over time. And I think this is really interesting to try to notice what no longer aligns with you and why it doesn't align with you. And it's almost like having a conversation with your past self, with the book, and with your current self, which may sound really vague, but let me know if this is kind of an idea that resonates with you. So the third topic I want to talk about is what do you read, or which types of books that you read. So as I talked about, there are different types of reading that you can do. You can read for inspiration and curiosity, which is usually for me nonfiction. You can read for learning, so these are personal or academic growth, and you can also read for style appreciation. So style appreciation is some kind of strong passages that have been written especially by really brilliant authors that just show the beauty of language in general. And these are the types of books that I will never be able to write myself, but I very much enjoyed reading. So in general, I try to read multiple books at once, and I think this is a really important tip for when you want to read more. I see a lot of people that start, for example, with Dante or something, and that is the book that they want to read and want to deep dive in. For me, this book was kind of Gödel, Bach, if you know which book I'm talking about. It's a classic book in machine learning or AI or this type of field in general that a lot of people want to read, but I've stranded in multiple times. But by reading multiple books at different levels, this kind of allows you to interleave the books that you want to read and the books that you have space and time to read. So in general, I usually have a popular fiction book that I'm reading. For example, one I really liked was The Poppy Wars, very fun. Another type of book is usually a non-fiction that I'm reading, a popular science book. I often have a popular science book, so right now I would say it's The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, although this maybe not really science, maybe this is more philosophy bordering, I don't know, popular philosophy, not sure. Usually I have one harder book that I'm reading, so that's something for my academic work. So right now I'm reading Critical Conversations in Computational Psychiatry. Highly recommend if you're in the field. It's an amazing book. So it's this one, Conversations in Critical Psychiatry. As you can see, I highlighted so much. Best book I've read in any psychiatry field. It's amazing. It's from Awais Aftab, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And he has conversations with psychiatrists that are working in the field of computational psychiatry or in general psychiatry. And he talks about the landscape of psychiatry in the current day and age, and it's amazing. Usually I also read a book in a foreign language. So right now I'm learning Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, and I'm trying to read simple books in this language. So it's usually some kind of teenage love romance novel because that's easy to read in a foreign language. And I think what I find really interesting in reading in foreign languages is that it definitely changes your thinking. So I also want to make a video on language learning. So if you're currently learning a language, would love to know what you're learning and maybe we can connect. Other things I read, of course, are academic papers for my work. So it's standard to read about a paper a day. So I'm trying to keep that up. It is very hard, but yeah. And finally, I also always try to read theses and dissertations. If you are a PhD student, or even if you're not a PhD student, theses and dissertations are freely published online often, so you can just download them. And I think it's really interesting to read what your fellow colleagues are reading. And it is usually on the edge of science, these theses. So it is really where the current field is at. So I would highly recommend, if you are inspired by any professor or scientist, to read their thesis. It is an interesting experience. So then finally, I want to end on a little bit some habits around reading and kind of this topic of when do you read, when do you make time for reading? Because I think that is something a lot of us struggle with. That's something I've also struggled with. So I want to dive into this topic. So first of all, this is a little bit related to habit formation. So number one is making reading a default activity. I think for a lot of us, our default activity is to pick up a phone, like to pick up a phone and scroll. So every time we're bored, we pick up our phone and we just deep dive into the phone. But I think having your book as a default activity that you do whenever you're bored, whenever you're waiting, will solve a lot of your problems. So one of the things I usually try to do is always carry a book. So if you're in the train, just have a book with you such that you can always read it. The next thing I do is to try to be aware of when I'm picking up my phone, for example, and try to be mindful and replace that with a book. Also, you can stack it with existing routines. So for example, when you wake up, instead of grabbing your phone, when you wake up, grab your book. When you fall asleep, instead of grabbing your phone before you fall asleep, try to have a book next to your bed. I think all of these are tips we've heard a million times, but they definitely do work. And one of the books that is related to this is Atomic Habits. I think this book has some faults. I don't think we can create a habit out of everything, but reading is definitely something that we can create a habit out of. The next thing is to have more formats that you can read in. So I've talked about this before. Physical books, of course, are great. Try to have a bigger one, a smaller one that you put everywhere. Audiobooks, so it's controversial if audiobooks do the exact same thing as reading, but I personally think they do if it is for conveying certain ideas. So for example, Atomic Habits, great book to listen on audiobooks, because I think it is mostly about a specific idea that you want to glean from the book and not really the experience of reading. The next one is to have some kind of Kindle. I personally don't like Kindle, but you can, for example, have a Kobo, which isn't affiliated with Amazon, and some other type of electronic reader, such that you can have more books with you to read. And that way you always have a bunch of books with you, especially when you're on holiday or traveling a lot. Then you can change your motivations to read a little bit more. So in general, this is from the Atomic Habit framework, I think. I'm not really sure where I got this one, but it is to make reading more attractive. And that is what we talked about before, but like to mix and match different books that you're reading. So don't just read the most difficult books, mix low effort books with high effort books to balance this kind of engagement and rest. So for example, an easy novel of Brandon Sanderson versus Conversation in Critical Psychiatry. I don't grab this book just before sleeping, but I grab this book in the afternoon, whereas like Brandon Sanderson is maybe a book I fall asleep with. Also with reading, don't stop reading, try to switch it up. So if you feel that you cannot read a certain book anymore because it's too difficult, try to grab another book that's a little bit easier and switch it up like that, such that you have a full hour of reading, for example. And also for me, it sometimes works to set small challenges. So sometimes I try to have a challenge of like 10 pages a day to kind of keep going. Then the last thing is, for me at least, is academic reading. So I do think academic reading is a little bit different than the type of more fun reading that I've talked about before. So with academic reading, I think I need to at least be a little bit more stricter. So I usually want to read a paper a day, and I really need to schedule this in. So for me, I've blocked reading time for academic reading. So every day I usually have about half an hour to an hour that I specifically dedicate in my time for academic reading. And reading papers is, in some hands, you can skim a paper. So I've made a full video on academic reading that you can see here. But on other hands, you really try to gather more ideas from academic reading. And I think that's the most important. So in general, for me, reading is really about this emotional benefits of reading, and I really want to end on this note. So for me, really reading helps me to focus better in other topics as well. I feel that reading in some ways is almost this meditative practice that allows me to tap into what type of mindset I'm in. So I noticed when I'm really distracted that reading becomes harder. And also I think for me, it really helps sometimes to reflect on my reading practice. So I ask myself these kind of questions sometimes when I'm not reading for a long time is, when do I not read? Why did I stop? Why did I start to read? And why do I want to continue to read? And I think these questions are quite personal. So the reason why you want to read specifically is very different from the reason that I want to read. So maybe the reason you want to read is to relax, or you want to learn more about a certain history topic, or maybe you just want to impress your friends with a few facts. And I think really knowing what is the reason that you're reading, what is the reason that you stopped reading, is important to make it a habit again in your daily life. So following a little bit on this idea of habit formation and learning new skills, if you're trying to learn more in your daily life and think more deeply, break the habit of mindlessly scrolling on your phone, another great tool I think is Brilliant, who were kind enough to sponsor this video. So Brilliant offers a visual and interactive lessons in math, science, programming, and even data analysis. So instead of passively scrolling on your phone, you can solve a few problems and train yourself to think more critically. So I personally am currently doing the probability in data course, and also one of my favorite courses in general is exploring data visually. Here you can learn to interpret real-world data from companies like Spotify and Airbnb. Data analysis, I truly believe, is a fundamental skill that every PhD student should learn. So the earlier you can start to build these fundamental basics of learning about data analysis, the better. So whether you're trying to build a daily learning habit or just trying to replace your 10 minutes of mindlessly scrolling, Brilliant makes it easy and surprisingly addictive as well. So to start learning for free, go to brilliant.org Charlotte Fraza or scan the QR code on the screen. You can also click the link in the description, and Brilliant is kind enough to give the viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which unlocks unlimited access to everything they offer. So thank you again, Brilliant, and let's go back to the video. And I hope that with this longer video, you got a little bit of information about reading in general. And for me, reading is really one of my biggest hobbies. I love reading. I try to read every day, and I hope you will too in the future. Thank you for joining, and see you next week. Bye.